Hi, I'm Beth Comstock. I am happy to welcome you to the Changemakers Book Club. We have a very special edition here with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. Satya, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Beth, for having me.
Now, we're here in Orlando together, so it's very exciting. You've got thousands of people milling around. We're at the Envision Conference and the Ignite Conference.
That's right.
And you had some big news today. Let's kick it off and share the big news with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, this morning at my keynote, we talked about really three I would say pivotal technologies that I think are going to reshape our own products, but more importantly, what our customers do with these technology. One was around mixed reality. In fact, for Microsoft 365 or Office 365, how can we change even the very nature of how people collaborate between design teams and manufacturing and field sales using VR, AR, and all of these modalities and change the nature of collaboration. So that was one piece. The second was, of course, AI. How is AI really becoming infused into all of the products? So one particular thing we talked about, which we're very excited about, is how AI in Dynamics 365 can transform customer support and customer service. That's something that HP is using today to change both the customer satisfaction on one side while becoming more efficient. And lastly, which was fun, was I had a chance to bring out our quantum team, which had a Fields Medal winner in math, along with two world-class physicists.
Yeah, I heard a lot of minds were blown with that one.
That was just pretty cool. Quantum computing is going to be this amazing new wave, which I think will get us past some of the constraints we have, whether it's the Moore's law or even the one human machine. And so to me, to be able to have a chance to share some of that was fun.
Well, congratulations. We have a lot to pack into the next 35 or 40 minutes. And so the way the book club works is we are live on Facebook right now. We invite people to send in questions. I'll be taking them here off my device, grabbing questions, asking my own. We also surveyed social and got a lot of great questions, especially from LinkedIn. So I'll make sure we go to the LinkedIn questions. And we're here because you are now a book author. Is this your first book?
It is my very first book.
And it's a great book. I spent the weekend just devouring it.
Thank you.
And I love the title, Hit Refresh. It made me think, that's a really powerful title for a company. You're the third CEO of a 43-year-old company. You followed two pretty famous CEOs in their own right. Yeah. And here you are talking about Hit Refresh, and it made me think a little bit of Lin-Manuel in Hamilton. You got one shot, right? Yeah. And that's what you're saying here. You had a shot. Your first shot was, let's figure out how do we refresh the culture. Talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, why did you think now was the time to write a book, and how did you come to this title?
No, it's a great question, Beth. I mean, one of the things I realized is most books are written, especially business books, as a look back, whether it's a grand success or a grand failure. There's not that much written while you're going through the process of transformation and change.
In fact, I don't know if any have been written that way.
In renewal. And so my quest was more to write about what I was going through and what we as a company were going through and what we as a society are going through while in the fog of war, so to speak. It is definitely not a memoir. It's definitely not a book that claims any victory or a destination reached. It's, in fact, if anything, the questions, the doubts, that constant process of renewal. I wanted to be able to capture it while going through it. And so that's at least the attempt. And the Hit Refresh, in fact, Bill, the title came about, I think, in an interesting way. Bill in his forward captures it. Like in the browser, the logic is that when you hit refresh, it doesn't change everything, but it's smart about changing the things that need changing. And that, I think, is a good metaphor for us as individuals in our life, or institutions or organizations, or even societies.
Yeah, there's a lot of, many questions we got about how do you do it yourself, so we'll come back to that. But you grew up in Microsoft. You've been in the company more than 25 years.
That's right.
And so I think there were critics from the outside saying, why did they bring in an insider? And it must have been hard to think about hitting refresh and not throwing away your shot when you're coming from within the culture. How did you think about refresh, given that you were from this culture?
No, you're absolutely right. I'm a consummate insider. Yeah. I mean, I've grown up 25 years in the company. And as I write in the book, one of the things that I've tried to do, even though as an insider it's hard to do, is to be as objective and look at everything that we were doing from an outsider's point of view. But in doing so, one of the things that I realized is I needed to go back deep into our history. Because after all, in the 43 years, we've got a lot of things right to be a successful company here in 2017, competing with a whole set of new players. Then I sort of said, that's why I even titled it as Rediscovering that core soul of the company. What are the things that we did in our past that made us successful? Let's figure out how to really re-amplify them. And then also be mindful of all the things that we got wrong, and then like dampen them. So to me, it is as much with an outsider's view, but being able to go back as an insider, which is what I am, to look at those two aspects. That was core to a lot of both what we did with the mission or with our culture.
Well, there are some people, I agree with this as well, that the best way to change is often to change from within. And I think you're a testament to that. And that's what you lay out in the book, which I think we'll get into. Yeah. I think you're also probably one of the few, if maybe the only CEO I can think who wrote a book that's titled The Quest to Rediscover Microsoft's Soul. The soul. I don't know of many CEOs who are writing about soul. Why? Like, what is that to you?
You know, I'm a big, Joseph Campbell fan, and I, for example, the Microsoft's creation story, right? When Bill and Paul created the first product, which was the basic interpreter for the Altair. At least for me, captures, I think, in its core essence, who we are, right? We are a company that creates technology so that others can create technology. So that's what I wanted to do. I want us to have a real sense of purpose and identity that we are proud of, but yet we are willing to renew that sense of identity with changing technologies, right? I mean, today, essentially we talked about a new computer, which is a quantum computer. But guess what we talked about? We talked about how Visual Studio can be used to program a quantum computer. That's uniquely Microsoft. That's who we are. And to me, I wanted to be able to capture that, be proud of it. Don't look around and see what competitors are doing, but be grounded in what you can uniquely do. And that's where this word soul, I think, captures it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just read from your book. You say, it is the thing that comes most naturally. It is the inner voice. It's what motivates and provides inner direction to apply your capability. I mean, it's just beautiful. There's a bit of poetry to that.
That's right.
When you talk like this to you talk in the book about how you brought your senior leadership team together, and many of them knew you, but were they surprised to hear you talk like this and to bring these words forth in leadership?
I mean, luckily enough, I grew up with many of them at Microsoft, so in some sense, my core sensibilities of at least how I approached were not unknown to them. But I do believe, one of the things that one of the best pieces of advice, in fact, Steve gave me was be your own person. Don't try to be like me or don't try to imitate Bill. Just be who you are. And I think that was one of the greatest pieces of advice because the way I lead our team is uniquely coming from what I feel. And what was refreshing or what was great and delightful was to see both my own team, but the entire company respond to it. But one of the keys of change and leadership I learned was it can't be new dogma. It has to be something that is invoking everyone's own process of renewal and change.
You're
and
trying
that's,
to give people their own space to
absolutely.
come at this.
That breathing space is so important.
That's
I
really
now
important.
realize it even more. But one of the things when I came out is I sort of said, hey, these are things I believe in, but I want you to think about them yourself. And I think those are some of the more useful words than anything else I said.
You're asking people to consider this and see how it applies to them. You mentioned just a minute ago, you said, Bill said to you, be yourself. How do you lead your teams to be themselves? What kind of space do you give to them? What kind of coaching and encouragement?
One of the things, in fact, I write about this in the book as well. We had this exercise very early on, which was quite frankly very surprising, where we all went around the room and sort of said, what is it that drives us, right? Each one of us. Why are we here and what drives us and what motivates us? And it was 12, 13 different stories. It was not, there was this one universal thing. And
it gives you a new way to connect to one another.
correct. And first, being able to sort of, wow, that's where that person is coming from. When you build this deeper connection, that itself is useful. But more importantly, I think it helped us each individually connect what we are most passionate about to the platform that Microsoft creates, right? Because it's in some sense a privilege to have a chance to work at a company like Microsoft. How do we use that? Where instead of thinking of it as a transactional relationship where I work at Microsoft, what if Microsoft worked for me? I was able to connect my personal passion to the platform that Microsoft is. That'll give us drive more deeper meaning. This unlocked that. That conversation was the beginning of that unlock.
So asking people to bring their passion forth. That's a great lesson. So we're asking you to submit your questions. Please do. We've gotten questions in advance. I thought one of them is relevant from Camille Bryant. She asked on LinkedIn. She said, I'd like to hear about things that we can do to hit the refresh button within ourselves to experience meaningful change and how we can influence others successfully. We talk about change in our personal and professional lives, but really are they any different, and how, do you approach them differently? So continue that theme with advice you might have for making change, and then do you see it differently personally and professionally?
In fact, it was through the process of writing this book that I realized that so much of my personal life has shaped who I am at work. I recount in this book both the birth of my son, as how that was one of the big hit refresh moments. Now I understand that so much more clearly than I understood it then, that I changed as who I was as a leader, as a co-worker, at work. And so I think it's hard. People can talk about compartmentalizing. I in fact think that we all really harmonize work and life. And so therefore it's better to do that. And then the lessons you learn through life's experiences, those hit refresh moments in your life's experience will make you a better leader, a better colleague at work.
Yeah, I've often thought I'm a much better leader because I'm a mother.
Absolutely.
Because it does, I think one, you're in different experiences, you learn about people in a different way. You also talk about empathy, and you talk about the empathy that came out with the experience with your son and your wife. I mean, maybe talk about the empathy and why that is so important to you and how that brought that about.
I mean, in the business context, for me, when I think about it, right, it's an existential business need, right? If you look at the core, why does Microsoft exist? It needs to innovate on behalf of our customers. In order to innovate on behalf of our customers means we need to be in touch with the unmet, unarticulated needs of our customers. There's no way we can be in touch with those unmet, unarticulated needs if we don't have that deep sense of empathy for our customers. If we're not listening, we're not just listening to what they're saying today, but listening for that inner need that is not even articulated. And so that's what I think empathy is very core to business. And for me, when the birth of my son, and especially watching my wife, Anu, and how she coped with it. Our son was born with in utero asphyxiation, and he's quadriplegic and has cerebral palsy. And he's now 21 years old, but when he was born, our life changed very drastically. And for a long time, I must say, a few years even, I was more in the mode of, why did this happen to us? What happened to me? Whereas for my wife, it was very natural for her to really care for our son and more worry and care and do her job, helping him cope with what had happened to him. And that's when it struck me watching her that nothing happened to me. In fact, my son is the one who is suffering, and my job is to really alleviate that. That's when I realized that, oh wow, that's that deeper sense of empathy and compassion that one needs to develop. Of course, you have to do that in your family, but it's the same that you have to do it at work, because there's no way you're going to have followership if you don't at work see through others' eyes what motivates them, what their needs are. You can't just say, I'm going to be a leader without being in touch. And I don't claim perfection and never will, but every day, am I trying to push that? Of course.
But you have to understand, not many leaders, business leaders, certainly CEOs, talk about empathy. I think you're going to get a lot of attention for this book for that reason. I think a lot of people want their leaders to talk that way, but they don't. Why is it so hard to bring this to work?
It's an interesting question, and I also think that at some level there's even the debate: is empathy the right attribute of leadership or not? And that's where I kind of look at it and say, if you, as a business leader, sort of take that front on the challenge that you exist as a business only to serve others, especially customers, then how can you say that empathy is something exogenous? Yeah. It cannot be. It has to be intrinsically what you're in the business for. Yeah. And so I hope it becomes, and I hope it doesn't become a cliche or an overused term. In fact, I don't think, like, one of the things that I worry about is I'm not trying to say, oh, here I am, an empathetic leader. That's far from it. If anything, I'm saying all of us every day have to strive to develop more of a sense of what are the other people thinking, needing, wanting, so that we can be better participants in our society.
Well, you're urging your colleagues to just go and walk in their customers' shoes, to go see for themselves. You talk in the book about get out of the office, don't just sit around. So we have a question that's just come in from Facebook. A reminder, we're doing this Facebook Live. Please send us your questions. This is from Jay Narayana, and Jay says, Satya, what in your view, what makes a good leader? We've talked about empathy, and he goes on to say, is leadership about collaboration, or do you see that sometimes you have to take a very unpopular decision when you lead a senior team, and how do you deal with that? I mean, it's hard not to be liked all the time.
I mean, it's a great question, because in some sense, I was thinking about this, which is, I've had to make lots of hard calls. So in some sense, one of the key jobs of a leader is, in an uncertain future, bring clarity by making decisions, create energy by bringing people together, and then ultimately driving success. These are, in fact, the 3 leadership attributes we talk about. And the interesting way Jay phrased his question, I think, is the real challenge, which is when you make these tough decisions, you, though, still need to carry out how you arrive at the decision, and then how you carry out the decision is where I think an empathetic approach will be so important. Because no one will question the fact that leaders make hard calls, but they will. Like Maya Angelou's quote, which is, no one will know what you said, but everybody will remember how you made them feel. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. That, I think, is something that all of us should remember.
But I also think people, they want decisions to be made.
Completely.
Because we've all seen teams where decisions don't get made, and too much collaboration.
That's right, and that's why bringing clarity when there is uncertainty all around is job number 1 for any leader.
So that's another good question that's come in. This is from Kenny Nyogan, and Kenny says, along these lines, he said he'd love to hear from you on how you I have to keep my glasses on and off. I can't wait till I get a good AR device from you.
We're working on it.
Yeah. So Kenny says he'd love to hear how you manage to keep your leaders accountable, and how, I love this, how your leaders keep you accountable.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the best way for us to think about accountability is to measure it not by any set of narrow metrics that you have around success, but by really making sure that your ability to pursue what you said you are pursuing, right? So in some sense, there is that, so a lot of people say, hey, how do you judge your people who are working for you? Of course, you're going to look at the business results, the numbers are there, the metrics are there. But one of the things that I look behind the numbers is, what was the approach? How much did they risk? Where did they go beyond the numbers? What were the things that they did to form collaborations where they were able to do things that are not, quote unquote, even obvious to me or were not obvious to me? That's the accountability we want. In fact, we talk a lot about growth mindset. Yeah. As our cultural meme. And I look at it and say, where was the growth mindset? I've realized that when you say be accountable, you can absolutely drive a lot of risk-averse behavior if you define accountability narrowly. But if you drive accountability for essentially what is growth, but growth not of just the top line and the bottom line, but the growth of your approach to bringing teams together, growth of risk-taking, which is successful, not just risk-taking for risk-taking's sake. That is, I think, the key. And in fact, I like to judge myself, and what my my colleagues will judge me on is the judgment I pass, and the right mix of ambition and risk with the ability to synthesize what is needed and do it well.
Have you had to ask questions in a different way, or different kinds of questions, to pull out those kind of full-rounded growth stories?
I mean, it's a great one, because we all at Microsoft grew up going to this class called precision questioning. And the idea was...
The perfect question.
That's right. It was all about, like, hey, let's take anybody who's claiming something and break it down, in the sense, like, let's find the 5 faults with the premise. It's very helpful, because it really helps you do critical thinking.
Which is needed in today's world, too.
Except that it also tears ideas apart. You don't give it enough breathing space. So we've all learned how not to pass judgment on others' ideas. As somebody said, hey, self-critical culture is a great one, except sometimes self-critical cultures can become, you're critical of everybody else except yourself.
Yeah. Well, you have this, I share your love of Carol Dweck and the growth mindset. It's a great book. We refer to it a lot when we have these conversations. You talk about your culture having to go from know-it-alls to learn-it-all. So this idea of just this adaptive mindset, how does one go from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all? And I could say at GE, we talk about the addiction to being right. Everybody has to be right. How have you solved that problem?
Oh, I wouldn't claim we've solved that problem. In fact, sometimes someone will come to me and say, hey, Satya, we found these 5 people who don't have a growth mindset. And I say, look, that's the exact...
We found them, we ratted them out. What do you do with them then?
I mean, that's the challenge, which is the idea really behind, I think, Carol's work and this going from know-it-all to learn-it-all is for us to be vulnerable, starting with me, to be able to say, oh, wow, I mean, I could have done that better. What are all my fixed mindset moments in a day? It's hard. I mean, we're human after all, and so therefore it's not easy to admit that we could have been better. But that's what is necessary. And that's why I think of this, that's one of the things where it's so important for me for growth mindset not to become new dogma that I am espousing, but it to be really something that people inside the company feel is just going to be making them better. In fact, making them better parents, making them better partners, better colleagues, better leaders. But it's got to come from there, because if it is just another corporate thing which they're doing for sort of Microsoft's sake, then I don't think any good will come off of it for them or for the company. But if it is something that they are more motivated by confronting their own fixed mindset, I think they will benefit, every individual, like I benefit, but the company for sure will benefit from it.
So it seems like you love to learn, and you're giving your colleagues room to learn. How do you test for curiosity?
I mean, I don't know whether I have cracked that as a test for curiosity, but what I've, one of the things that I've tried to, in fact, I write in the book, is this interlock successful companies have between the concepts or products that we build, the capability that we have, and the culture. Like, in some sense, when you go from being a startup to being a successful company, that means you've got a great virtuous cycle between the product, your capability, and culture. But that's when the challenge really starts, because if you keep continuing to grow at 20% all through, that's wonderful, but all things, ultimately taper off. There's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine. The question is, when the growth stops, how have you built the new concept? Have you built the new capability to even get to the new concept? Has the culture actually enabled you to build it? So my best test, at least at a system level, is to watch for it. Watch for, are we building new capability that gives us even option value, right? I mean,
option value is a good concept.
It's that second level of derivatives that you have to sort of really, as leaders, be much more in touch with. Like today, for example, you look at what's happening with silicon, right? We're in the cloud business. The cloud, requires us to, in fact, innovate in silicon in order to be able to do better networks, better encryption, better AI. But the silicon capability we first built because of what we did in our devices, in Xbox. But if it's only locked in Xbox, but it's not available in our cloud, then it's not of any use. So that ability to have the capability that can then be reconfigured into new concepts, I think is a real test for whether you are both curious, but more importantly, can you back that curiosity up with some action?
So let's talk about the book for a little bit more. Tatiana Lima sent a question in through Facebook, and Tatiana asks, she wants to know more about your writing process. What did you learn from writing the book? How did you do it, and what did you learn, is what she's asking.
It's hard. The one thing that I've realized is writing is a discipline. I mean, there's, to some degree, I do think in prose it was cathartic, the process, because I had to more clarify some of the thoughts. But since the book's premise was more about raising questions and at least trying to sort of say, hey, how am I struggling through the answers versus trying to be recounting, it came more naturally. And then I had a bunch of very capable co-authors who kept me honest about it. Was it hard to put your personal stories in there? It was. In fact, I would say what came more naturally were the second and third stanzas. That ability to go back and recount my own past and then draw the line from there to how I think and who I am was the hardest part. It didn't come naturally to me. It was not what I was planning on. But I realized that without it, I think the authenticity of the rest would have been hard to pull through. I can tell from reading the book that you're a lover of books. You quote authors, whether it's poetry, philosophy, science fiction, business. You have a lot in there. Fast Company was out last week with a cover article, and they quoted as saying, I love the way they talked about it. They said that you have vast quantities of books all over your office. They fill rows of shelves and are piled by the dozen on tables all around your desk. So I just have this wonderful mental image of you and books, and yet you're a tech person. But what do you love about books? And give us a recommendation of a couple of books that everyone should be reading. I think this is something that I perhaps picked up from my father, who had who has tremendous amounts of intellectual curiosity, and he was a lover of ideas, and so I'm always reading, picking up. I mean, in all honesty, I think I have more books than I read. Are you a speed reader with all those books? Yeah, I do speed read, but in some sense, I even believe maybe if I have the books around me through osmosis, I'll get them. Well, you might be working on some technology to make that happen. But I don't know. But I love books, and in fact, even in that Fast Company article, there were these 6 books, and one of the books, which I think is just so great, and every time I think about the change we're going through, is like studying the Industrial Revolution and the tumultuous change, and Carl Poliani, who's written an amazing book of transformation, who's an economic historian, I think who captured, the hard process of societal change. I mean, that concept that economy and society are interlocked, and how I think it's up to us to be able to really make sure that we understand it. And I think it's really important for us right now in this digital revolution to look back in the other industrial revolutions and learn the lessons from it. There are lessons to be learned. And as different as it is, humans are still humans, people are still people. John Paul Manjay has a question about, I'm sorry, let me get you, this is Lays Bostrom. Yeah. Lays has a question, Lays is about change. Lays says, the world, to your point, is changing so quickly today. How do you think about leadership differently today than you have in the past because of the pace of change? And also as we move forward with a more ambiguous future, I mean, the fact is the world is never going to be as slow as it is today. How do you lead that way? Yeah, I mean, in some sense, I think you have to sort of accept that leadership is about bringing clarity in uncertain times. In some sense, I always joke to people who get promoted to corporate vice president at Microsoft saying, we really don't need you as a CVP or a corporate vice president if things were all certain, and if your job was all well described, and if all decisions you ever needed to make, there was a rule book you could just follow. So in some sense, I would say you have to thrive. You want to need to thrive. And in fact, the more things get uncertain, the more leadership is needed. So your job is to bring clarity. And the question is, how do you bring clarity? you can't, this is where decision making, passing judgment are going to be so key. And the process of how you get to that judgment is one of the things I'm learning is so important. You've got to have a certain amount of curiosity. You've got to listen before you decide. But ultimately, there is such a thing as analysis paralysis. Yeah. So to me, that ability to be able to sort of make decisions, but at the same time do that with a process that allows you not to get stuck, I think is the key to leadership of today's age.
Let's shift to purpose, mission. I think you're also talking about clarity, but you're talking about vision. And it's been clear from the minute you write in the book, the board asked you for a letter. Clearly, they liked the vision that you had. You're sitting here today. Talk a little bit about how do you identify a company's purpose? You speak so eloquently in here. How did you what is Microsoft's purpose, and how did you uncover it?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I went back to the very first product that Microsoft created, which was the basic interpreter for the Altair, and I said, okay, what can I learn from it? Like, what is that telegraph in 2017? What it tells me about Microsoft is our core identity and sense of purpose comes from creating technology that allows others to create more technology. Then you say, wow, look at this. Now, every business is a digital business. Every company is a software company. So what we started way back 43 years ago is even more important today than it was. It was for a few hobbyists at that time. Now it's mainstream need for everyone. And so to me, that's where I said, okay, instead of being envious of maybe other competitors who may be doing things, let's double down on what comes more naturally to us. That sense of purpose. So that mission, I've now come to realize that, if you have a great balance sheet and you have a lot of capability, you can delude yourself to thinking you can do anything. In fact, the real rate limiter could be the world only wants you to do things that come more naturally to you. Of course, you've got to renew it with new technology paradigms. It doesn't mean go back to 43 years ago and start building the basic for the Altair. That's not what the world wants. But the world wants, hey, what are those tools for the quantum computer? Can Microsoft do something in that space? Let's do a world-class job of that. So my realization is that having that sense of purpose is so important, more so than any strategy of the day.
What is Microsoft's purpose?
It's that empowerment. It's empowering people and organizations all over the planet to achieve more. And I say this with, there's so many key words there.
But I've heard so many people here today use those exact words, and I think that's a sign of a good culture when people can repeat it. So Correct. It's clearly people believe it.
And it comes because of internalizing what are the key aspects of it. They're not just a set of words, but they should have deep meaning in how we make choices on what we create and what we don't. For example, we think about people and institutions people build as first class. So when we think about you working at GE, we think about, it's not just what your role as the CMO of GE, but also what GE is trying to get done. That's first class even in our software. I wouldn't be sitting here if it was not for the worldwide reach of our products, right? I mean, I'm a product of Microsoft's technology reaching me, so that's sort of core to us. But the last aspect of that mission is probably the most salient but the most important, which is it's not about our technology ultimately. It's about what others can do with our technology.
It's the outcome of your technology.
Yeah, it's the outcome. It's the tool maker in us.
Yeah.
And I feel like as long as we internalize that, but then go at it with mixed reality or augmented reality and AI and quantum, these are all new technologies, but let's stick with what comes naturally to us in terms of what we can contribute there, then I think we'll be fine. So
we got a question and inviting everyone to have the questions coming. We're here on Facebook Live taking your questions. So this is from Jose Luis Lopez. And along the lines of purpose, Jose asks, what's your personal purpose? And how does it align to the Microsoft platform? And is this how you define your true north?
That's a great piece. In fact, that exercise I write about in the book where we all went around the room as a leadership team and talked about our personal passion and personal philosophy was very helpful in even me getting clarity around what is my purpose, what gives me a real boost. And I realized that one of the things that I love is ideas. But more importantly, I love connecting those ideas with increasing levels of, I would say, understanding of needs of people around me. You can call it developing or pushing myself to develop deeper empathy for more and more people, and then having impact. That's kind of really what when I think about Microsoft, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is accessibility. And when I see the advances in AI that our researchers are coming up with, that can get translated into products that we create. I mean, one of the most amazing things that happened was with the latest release of Windows 10 is we have eye gaze technology. And this started in a hackathon 3 years ago where a bunch of researchers and product people all came together and worked with, in fact, Steve Gleason and ALS victims and said, okay, if someone has only the use of their eyes, can they type?
That's powerful.
And they said, okay, let's build that in. Yeah. And now it's just democratized. So to me, having a chance to work with people like that gives me the greatest of satisfaction. And that, in some sense, is sort of gives me a sense of purpose.
So this is a perennial favorite. This is a question from Artis Zelamenis. And Artis says, what was your most notable miss? Would you do it differently today? And give us a little bit of, people want to know. I mean, you've obviously very successful, but you've had some missteps along the way.
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, the one I write in the book is the incident at Grace Hopper. When asked about women in pay and pay equity, without getting the broader context of the question, the fact that I gave a complete nonsensical answer based on my personal experience, which was just not at all what the question's broader context was, taught me deeply something that I thought I understood. When I went back, when I even had a chat with people like Amy Hood or Peggy Johnson and all these women who work, in fact, in my leadership team, whom I respect deeply, and got to know their stories. And then I realized that, wow, as a CEO, I need to be more not talking about a system that's going to do good, but to create a system that every day is going to be more inclusive, is going to create that opportunity for women and ethnic minorities to be able to make progress. So that realization, I mean, I would say, coming from mistakes is important. It is a harsh one for me personally, but I feel I learned a lot from that experience.
I recall from that experience, that situation, you were quick to address it too. I mean, you came back and said, hey, I didn't get this right. Here's what I've learned. Here's how I have addressed that.
Completely, and even right on stage, Maria Clave was so kind to sort of take my answer and sort of teach me right there and then as to saying, what you're saying is not correct, Satya, because it makes no sense. Yeah. And that's not my life's experience. And so that's really, I mean, again, going back to this notion of developing, none of us are going to ever be perfect, but can I learn from my own mistakes and develop a deeper sense of empathy for the real issues? That's clearly something that, we've really I've pushed hard to learn.
Anita Alexander asks, how do you determine when to hit refresh and when not to? How do you figure out? It's a really good one, I think. It's important not to hit refresh and pivot away when you're almost there, and how do you know when to do what? Yeah,
I mean, it's sort of a NP complete problem, because I think it's very, very hard to really know, but that's where I think good judgment will matter. Ultimately, one of the things that somebody once told me is, like, you can't plant a tree and then sort of come next morning, uproot it and say, why is it not growing? So you have to have some amount of strategic patience and not keep hitting refresh when you're nurturing something new. So to know, I perhaps a little bit of what it takes, especially in our context of growing new businesses.
Yeah, it's very hard.
It's very hard. Like, you look at Microsoft and you say, wow, new businesses don't grow in billion-dollar chunks.
We dream in scale. We don't dream in the small little seeds.
But it doesn't, but that doesn't work. Like, nothing grows in billion-dollar chunks. It has to be $1 million before it can be 10. And that's, I think, where having that sense of that sensibility or that judgment will matter. So I don't think there's a formula for it. But ultimately, you have to be able to question any conventional wisdom that's going around and stand by what is the deep conviction you have on the right thing to do.
So let's shift gears there's a lot about leadership. We'll come back to that. We have a few minutes left, but let's talk about artificial intelligence, AI. You lay out in the book, I mean, I can tell you're very passionate about it. It's the future of Microsoft. Can you talk about how you see AI going? And in particular, you say there's kind of 3 key areas that you want Microsoft to focus in. How should we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI to me is just not another feature that you just add. I mean, in fact, when I look back, to be an AI company, you really need to internalize that the core asset of your company's data. So in our case, when we think about building the AI platforms, even with something like Microsoft 365, we want to help our customers recognize that it's their data that is inside of their tenant in Microsoft 365. That is their most strategic asset. So to me, that's what is really exciting, which is, can we start taking data, reasoning over data, and creating these new levels of automation? Like, any organization is going to be measured by their ability to predict things or build analytical power to predict things. That's going to be the new currency. And so that's why AI, I think, is going to be profound. And on the experience side, mixed reality, like for the first time, it's not about any one device and its camera tricks. It's really the ability to take what is analog and digital and blend it. When we can create these digital mirrors that blend itself in reality.
And you talk about mixed reality. Give us a little bit of depth on that. I mean, I think you guys use that term almost exclusively. You started it, I guess.
That's right.
Say.
To me,
what does it mean?
Yeah, what it means is this notion of blending analog and digital. When your field of view becomes the ultimate computer, right? So in some sense, there is no other sort of screen to mediate except you're seeing things. When you wear the HoloLens, you get a glimpse of it, right? Which is, you see the holograms and the physical objects all superimposed with each other and related to each other. But it's not even about one device experience. One of the demos we did today, which was about Ford and their design experience, of how a car comes to be. In the past, they would do it with clay, but now designers are designing with HoloLens, but they're sharing it. The people in manufacturing, or even in their sales side, can comment on it. They can leave voice annotations on the design. That ability to, for example, orchestrate collaboration within the organization, where people are using phones or head-mounted devices for complete immersion with VR, or sometimes augmented. To me, that's the richness. So it's not any one modality, but any modality being brought together.
It sounds exciting. It's also very scary. People are worried about the future of their jobs. What do you say to people who come to you and say, like, hey, AI is going to get rid of my job? What do I do about that?
I mean, again, this is one of those places where I think we should look back at our history, the Industrial Revolution, and see what are all the things we can learn. The first thing I would say is we have to do our very best work in education, which is corporations like ours have to do our job, but us as a society have to come together and say the boys and girls in school are getting educated for the jobs of the future. I'm very excited about even LinkedIn and what it can mean. The economic graph that LinkedIn has and that we share broadly, to essentially create a feedback cycle between the jobs, the skills required, and the training required, I think is going to be even more of paramount importance, because that's what's going to be the market mechanism for us to continuously evolve the skills in our economy. But then beyond that, I think we should not fall victim to this lump of labor fallacy, which is, instead of thinking of it as all the jobs that needed to be created are already here, we should question, what are the new jobs?
There are new jobs, right.
Like, when I look at Minecraft and that generation, maybe there is really new digital artisans that can get created. Maybe we can have people-on-people jobs. I mean, when I look at, even our own healthcare costs and elder care, what can we do? Even teachers. So in some sense, when I look at the jobs, we will have to really think about the wages for those jobs.
So we need our imagination to think through
Absolutely.
the new opportunities. So in the time we have left, I'd love for you to share some of your lessons learned from the love of cricket. I think that's one of the beautiful things about the book, is just your passion for cricket, and you actually have some good leadership lessons. What can you share?
I mean, I think there are a couple of different things that I recount, but perhaps the most profound one is a leadership one I picked up. I remember one day I was a bowler in cricket, and I was really bowling real trash, and this captain of mine comes to me and says, okay, let me take over from you, and he gets the team the breakthrough, and then he gives me the ball back, and then I go on to do well in that particular match. And I've always thought, why did he do that? You know, he could have just continued or given it to somebody else, because after all, I was failing. But then now I realized what he was trying to do was to make sure that he didn't break my confidence. He needed me for the entire season. And the last thing he wanted was to have one bad patch affect my confidence. And I thought, wow, what an enlightened captain.
Yeah, what a great leader, great empathy.
And here he was with his high school team.
Yeah.
And I sort of like, wow, that, if I can just
and
get
it's carried
that.
with you.
It's carried with me all through.
Well, two last questions, and then we'll have to sign off. So thank you, everyone, for some great questions. This is from John Paul Mange. John Paul says, it's really motivating to hear you, and it has been. What should a person do to refresh their leadership skills, and what should they do to discard the things that stand in their way?
I mean, I think the thing that I have come to realize is this idea of growth mindset. I think each one of us has to start and end the day by, in fact, confronting our fixed mindset. The more we can acknowledge to ourselves what are the things that you want to do better going forward is probably the beginning of the change that you can bring about, not only in yourself, but around you.
So be open to change. What would you like people to take away from your new book? It's out tomorrow. Hit Refresh is available tomorrow. What would you like people to take away from this when they get their hands on it?
I mean, I hope that this book, if it does one thing, it should be about really opening a dialogue around what does it mean to hit refresh? Why is it important for us individually? Why is it important for us as organizations and for us as a society? I think that continuous process of renewal is what makes human progress possible. And so let's just have that dialogue be front and center.
Yeah, well, thank you. It is a great book of renewal. You haven't thrown away your shot, and I'm sure there'll be many more. And thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you. Thanks, Satya.
So
great
much.
conversation.
Thank you so
Thanks
much,
a lot.
Beth.
And thank
It's a
you
real
all.
collaboration.
We'll be replaying this and putting clips on LinkedIn. Thanks a lot. See you next time.
Thank you.